We begin our worship by lighting our candle to remember that God's light is with us wherever we are. And we're in ordinary time when the church would be dressed in green, and our faith is growing and changing like a green growing thing. And we hear some of the things that Jesus said and did. Filled with the Holy Spirit, Jesus went out among the people to show them God's power and love, to preach good news to the poor and bring hope. And his friends, his disciples, went with him to share his life and his work. And Jesus told stories about what God's kingdom was like. And when he told those stories, he used very ordinary things that the people listening would use and understand in their daily lives. And a lot of those people were farmers. And so one of the things he said is that God's kingdom is like seeds. He said it's like mustard seeds. Mustard seeds are very small. So there's my finger. You can see how small they are. They're very little. They don't look like much. But they grow up into a big plant. And this actually isn't a mustard plant because I don't have a mustard plant to show you. But maybe you can do some research and find out what a real mustard plant looks like. And maybe if you have mustard seeds at home, you could plant some and grow some yourself. So Jesus said those tiny little seeds that don't look like much, they grow into a big plant. And it can be a home for all the birds to live in. He said God's kingdom is a lot like that. Another thing the people listening to Jesus' stories would have known a lot about is making bread. And maybe you've been making some bread at home over the last few months yourself. And he said God's kingdom is like yeast in bread. And we put the yeast into the bread mix. A little bit more. We put the yeast into the bread mix like this. Sometimes you have to put it in with warm water, but the recipe I'm making says we can just put it in. You mix the yeast in and it makes the bread dough rise up. And I'm going to finish mixing this and then show you the bread dough before and after the yeast makes it rise. So let's hope it works so we can see what Jesus was talking about. So this is the bread dough, all ready to start rising with the yeast, and we'll check back to see what it looks like later. And now the yeast has had some time to work in the bread dough, and look how much bigger it is. Those little tiny bits of yeast that have grown and worked over time and made the bread so much bigger than it was. And that's what Jesus said God's kingdom is like. Another thing the people listening to the stories understood was buying and selling things. Many people did that for a living, as we do today. So Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like if a jewelry seller had many beautiful, fine jewels. But then they found the most wonderful jewel of them all, and they sold everything else that they had so that they could buy the one most wonderful jewel. And the people who heard these stories wondered what Jesus meant by them, and we're going to wonder together now, and you can pause the video if you like to wonder with the people who are with you. I wonder what your favourite part of those stories was. I wonder what the most important part of those stories was. Jesus used things that the people listening to him would have used every day. Making bread and planting seeds and buying and selling things. I wonder what things you use every day that Jesus might use to talk about the kingdom of heaven if he were here on earth now. Maybe the kingdom of heaven is like a Zoom call. Maybe it's like Lego. Maybe it's like your pet. Maybe it's like Play-Doh or drawing or your favorite toy or something else in your house. I wonder if you can write or think about your own parable using something you use every day. I wonder how the people felt when they heard Jesus tell these stories. I wonder which part of the story is for you. I wonder if you can think of any other stories in the Bible that have jewels or bread or seeds or plants in them. I wonder how those stories are the same as these stories. I wonder how they're different. I wonder if there's anything in your house that you'd like to use to make something or play something with this story. The recipe I used for the bread is in the description of the video, so you can make it yourself if you'd like. Or maybe you can plant some seeds, or maybe you can think of something else you'd like to do to play with these stories. And we can keep wandering throughout the week, but for now, our story is finished.